Well, every now and then I get a call from a client about cracking walls like the ones you're looking at. And I'm going to ask you to just hang tight with me because the first couple of videos were shot by the person I sent there. And so they're not quite pristine. And then the second video will go back to our typical videos. Many of these cracks that usually come to us tend to be superficial, not a whole lot of a big deal, but once in a while we run into what I would describe as high quality disaster. So in today's video, I want to talk with you about issues of cracking walls during or after foundation. As I mentioned, the first couple of videos are not going to be pristine, but then just hang tight. In the next minute or so, we'll get back to our regular video where we'll have finished this inspection and I'll be back in Karateng. So hopefully by the end of the video, I might share maybe one or two nuggets that you might find useful as you work on your construction project or as you resolve some of these same issues that we are dealing with at different sites. Now, the video you're looking at is actually taken from a client's home, and we are here to correct some of these mistakes. But that is not actually what we were invited to do at first. Initially, the client invited us to do a kitchen for her. And as you can tell, given the status of the wall, look at how it's cracking through the electrical lines. There's no way we would be installing a kitchen without correcting all these mistakes. And typically when this happens, we often give the clients two options. One, we can give you time to correct the mistakes, then invite us back to do our work. Or if you don't have systems to address that, we can still bring our folks to correct the mistakes before we start doing the interiors. So at this point, actually, we had to request a work stoppage even on the tiling, which was already going on, because the last thing you want to do is to do your finishes on a wall or flooring that has integrity issues. So anyway, before we review all of that, welcome to Kenya, my friends. I usually disclose where I am, but the client I'm working with is very private. And so I will not disclose much about where we are or who our client is. But I'm hoping to use these clips to illustrate some of the things we run into daily as we work with different clients. Now, if you're joining us for the first time, I hope this video will be useful to you. I'm a Kenyan American who is working hard to return to the village from diaspora. I've lived for over almost 2 decades in America, and now I'm spending most of my time in the village, but I keep going back and forth. Now, in the process, I help returnees with construction project, real estate, and matters related to returning. And so if you need any assistance in that regard, feel free to reach out to us on the number that I post below. So anyway, join us this afternoon and let's chat about issues of cracks and what you can do should you find yourself in a place where you have what we're looking at right now. Now, as I said earlier, many cracks that we encounter typically are minor hairline cracks that should not be problematic. At least if not for the aesthetics that people worry about. And this is especially true when you talk about surface level cracks that can be filled in, sanded down, and painted over. However, some cracks can be intense, especially those originating from the foundation, those that will impact your wall and potentially could actually bring your house down. So how you fix these cracks certainly will depend on the origin of the crack. Sometimes all you have is a foundation issue, which has not gone too far, but oftentimes foundation issues transfer all the way to the walls. And so, again, depending on what's going on, the fixes can be really varied. Some of them are minor, inexpensive, but others can be quite costly. So some of these massive cracks, as I've said earlier, can really compromise the integrity of your house. And you want to address them as soon as you notice there's a problem. So, all right, folks. Now we are back to Karateng, as I said earlier. So like I said, this video is not one of my perfect videos, but I hope you'll be focusing on what I'm saying and not necessarily what you're looking at. So in general, though, wall cracks can be caused by a variety of factors, including settling, temperature issues, humidity, poor construction practices, structural issues like foundation movement, or even water damage. So while the list I'm about to give you is not exhaustive of all the types of cracks that can appear on your wall, the vast majority of cracks that I often run into are covered in these 5 categories. So the first category of cracks is what I would describe as hairline cracks. And these are very fine cracks that are smaller than 1/10 of an inch wide. They vary in size and quantity and usually are very superficial, requiring minimal repairs. The second group of cracks are what we can describe as vertical cracks. And these, as the name suggests, run up and down and often, in some cases, not necessarily a cause for alarm. But again, this is very context dependent. But especially if there are multiple vertical cracks along the same wall, then yes, we may have a bigger issue than simply a crack that needs to be painted over. Then the next one would be horizontal cracks. In many cases, these, as the name suggests, basically run parallel to the floor. And these are the ones that I tend to believe may be more likely linked to structural problems. Some of them would just be fine, but these are the ones that tend to be connected with the larger structural issues that have to be addressed as soon as possible. And then again, you have diagonal cracks. And these cracks, again, as the name suggests, typically run about 45-degree angle across the wall. They often start from corners, window frames, door frames, and run diagonal almost from one end to another progressively. So again, they vary quite a bit depending on the issue going on. And then the last group of cracks is what we would describe as stair-step cracks. And these are the kind of cracks that are common in brick and concrete walls, who travel up along the seams of the blocks. Now, these can be quite a problem if you have. They are less common, but when you have them, you have a big problem. So here's more of a detailed description of some of the more common causes that I have run into. Number one, the most common cause is foundation movement. As is typical with many homes, once you build it, to some degree, many homes settle a little. Again, depending on the type of foundation built and the soil underneath, there may be some shifting, which may cause some cracks. If the shifting is intense, then yes, you tend to see much bigger cracks. And of course, this happens when there's some settling going on. In many cases too, you have cracks that happen as a result of temperature and humidity changes. Again, keeping in mind that building in Kisumu is so different than building at the coast in Kenya versus building in northeastern. So if you're using the same material across all these three areas, you can expect materials to respond differently in these different climatic areas. So building materials often expand and contract. Again, depending on the material, depending on the temperature, humidity, and all that stuff. And if this expansion and contraction is intense, then of course you can expect a certain degree of cracking. In some cases, these problems are linked to poor ventilation, where because you have a less ventilated room, or in sections where there's less sunlight, the dampness around that area can actually exacerbate moisture buildup, which might end up causing your walls to expand and contract in ways that lead to cracks. So, but the number one reason for the cracks that I've seen so far, especially in the areas that we tend to work, is what I call just basically poor construction practices. Especially when you see folks not paying attention to proper ratio between cement, sand, and ballast. I've seen two cases. One, you have fundis who think they're trying to help you by using less of expensive materials, and then ending up inadvertently screwing you over. There's also the second case where if it's a fundi who is buying materials, then they end up buying less materials. And of course, because you're not building, you will never know that. You'll only find out they actually use less cement when you start having cracks on your wall. So that's a very common problem that I see in multiple sites. In other cases, it's a matter of poor choice of materials. Whether you're picking up the wrong BRC, or in other cases, you're talking about poor curing. And then in some cases, fundis just deviate from what engineers have described. I've seen cases where a fundi just tells the owner of the home that the engineer who designed the home was wrong, and so they have a better solution. I had that experience too, where my fundis were suggesting something that quote unquote was supposed to be cheaper, that deviates from what the engineers designed. Now, the end result is that fundis, many of them are not trained engineers, so they may not know the math behind how the home was designed. And those problems may cause larger issues later on. And in some cases, especially when you're dealing with the relatively tricky soil, I always insist that the first 3 courses need to have a wall pass in between, as opposed to doing it every other course. Now, some of my clients would complain that's expensive, but I've seen this long enough to know why I insist they do that. In rare cases, you may end up with straight joints. Once in a while it's there, but this is less common. If you don't know what that is, please look it up. Now, in some cases, then you end up with cracks because of the use of subpar materials. The most common one is poor sand, where people go for the cheapest sand, which may not be proper for plastering, and then next thing you know, you start having cracks. Places like Naivasha, I noticed it's hard to come by really good sand. And so to cut costs, fundis sometimes go for cheap sand or cheap cement. Then you end up with problems with cracking. The other issue then too you'll notice is in some areas, I in many cases I've actually recommended folks to use mchongo. I don't know what mchongo is in English. When backfilling the foundation, it tends to work better than the other alternatives. So if you can, please ask your fundi what mchongo is. They should know what that is. Now, with water damage, again, it could be either just a matter of flooding, improper channeling of stormwater drainage, or there are cases where you have leaks with your plumbing system. And so if you have leakage somewhere, then that may actually increase the amount of humidity, which ends up weakening your walls. And again, depending on the type of soil that you're building on, some soils, particularly black cotton soil, the famous black cotton soil, can be fairly problematic because it expands and shrinks in ways that are not comparable to other types of soils. So those movements can end up causing issues with cracks. Now, the one issue that many people don't pay attention to is cracks that come about as a result of vibrations. For one, if you're building next to an active construction site, where there's machines being used, your neighbor is digging foundations or even blasting stones, that may actually end up compromising your own finished home. Or if you're building fairly close to a mine, or where your neighbor is blasting rocks to dig a well, those are things that can really cause problems with cracks on your walls. And sometimes it's just living next to a very busy road with very heavy traffic. So those are potentially problematic issues. So that said, the last one before I forget, I've mentioned in my previous videos that it's helpful to be careful with what kind of trees you plant next to your building. Some trees have very large roots that may end up compromising your foundation. So that said, at what point should you worry about the kind of cracks that feature in your home? Number one, look at the size. If it seems big or if it seems like it's widening over time, then you have a problem. Cracks that simply stop at somewhere and don't increase may not be as big of a deal in terms of the structural integrity. So look at width, look at location, look at depth, and then other associated symptoms. And when I'm talking about location, you want to pay attention to cracks that occur near corners, near windows, doors, or along edges of ceiling, because this one tend to be a lot more problematic. And then very deep cracks, obviously, no matter where it is, requires attention. So you really want to be careful with those kinds of cracks. And then when I said associated symptoms, I mean things like when you notice uneven flooring. So when you went in your house, your floor looked okay, but over time you notice that the floor is uneven. That might be a telltale sign that you have a problem. Now, in addition, you may also notice that certain windows are no longer closing properly. Or then you start noticing that there are gaps between the walls and the floors. Then you realize, it's probably time to pay attention. So again, the only way to deal with these kinds of issues, as I have said in the past, is to get a proper fundi.